you and welcome to the fourth meeting of this series of conversations on what would Groupius do a century later. My name is Begoña López Averasturi and I am from Conexiones, improbables, the organization that is promoting this series within the framework of the European initiative, the new European Bauhaus. As I was saying, today is the fourth meeting of the second phase of the cycle called Parallel Dialogues. In total, there are 7 parallel dialogues that each day are led by different organizations. On this occasion, under the title A Future for All Places and Territorial Cohesion, Kate Böhme and Christian Lüer from Spatial Foresight will be leading and moderating this conversation. Kate Böhme is the founder and director of Spatial Foresight, and Christian Lüer is an analyst and policy advisor at Spatial Foresight. So let's give them the words. Kate, Christian, welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for the introduction and for organizing this series of events, inviting us to do so. Just for everybody to be in the conversation today, be aware the conversation is streamed and recorded, so that everybody is aware of that. Yeah, as was just said, this is part of a larger context, and we were asked whether we want to contribute there. And Christian, we thought looking into the territorial cohesion issue in the future for all places from a new perspective and saying, what would Groupius say today, 100 years later, about those things? And for that, we have organized now a session. We are very happy that everybody who we have invited could make it. Before going into further ado and introducing all the panelists and the program, I would like to hand over the word actually to Roberto to say a few more words on the background of that session and the series of dialogues we are in.
Thanks, Kai. Thanks, Begoña. Good afternoon to everyone. I would like to greet you all on behalf of Conexiones improbables, hybridizing to innovate, partner of the European Bauhaus and promoter of the cycle of conversations with the title, What Would Groupius Do a Century Later? First of all, I would like to congratulate and thank Kai, Christian, and the entire Spatial Foresight team for the extraordinary panel of experts they have convened for this conversation. I'm sure it's going to be very stimulating. Groupius, as you know, founder of the Bauhaus in 1919, was an architect and thought of architecture and building as the ultimate creative expressions. But if he were alive today, what would Groupius be? A maker, a community activist, a designer, a technologist, a relational artist, an urban planner? Today, we continue with another of the 7 conversations we are promoting with which we want to contribute to enrich the discourse on the European Bauhaus and how, from different disciplines and perspectives, an inclusive, sustainable, and beautiful Europe can be built. Today, we are going to talk about the future of all places and about territorial cohesion. And here we find the world place, the natural place, the intimate personal, family and home place, the city place, which needs a good mix of housing, commerce, cultural space and meeting space. Those common spaces that we must reclaim in order for civic life to exist. The rural place, the places of transition and connection, the non-places. I live in Vitoria-Gasteiz, European Green Capital in 2012, a city of 250,000 inhabitants, administrative capital of the Basque Country, and capital of a province with just over 330 inhabitants. In other words, 75% of the population lives in the city, which represents a major chance of territorial balance in a province where the rural environment plays an important role in preserving the greatest diversity of natural ecosystems in Europe, but which at the same time has the highest industrial percent of gross domestic product in Spain, and also the highest per capita income in Spain. Clearly, we are talking about first world challenges, a context where social differences are relatively small, something very different from what I experienced with several Latin American countries with which we work. But how does the European Bauhaus challenge us? Perhaps from our point of view, the answer to this question lies in reinforcing the transdisciplinarity and specifically the transversality of creativity with all social and productive activities, bringing new perspectives to our way of life, to the conception of our civic spaces and our homes, to our production and consumption systems, to our educational model, to our ways of relating internally and with the outside world, and reinforcing our collective commitment to sustainability and the well-being of people anywhere. And to do so from inclusion, trying to ensure that no one is really left behind. Our societies are beginning to be aware of the urgency of sustainability, of the consequences of climate change, of the necessary energy transition, but they act as if 2030, the date set for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, were still a long way off. They are very focused on digitalization and this technological impact in terms of efficiency, production processes, but perhaps pay little attention to the ethical and human dimension of this accelerated digitalization. In addition, there is a third key element in the transformation of our societies and economies: creativity, key to driving innovation. Sustainability, digitalization, and creativity must go hand in hand in the development processes in a coherent and cohesive manner so that all people and all places have a real future. Then, how do we transform the European Bauhaus from an initiative into a social movement that reinforces this idea? What role do we really want to play in defining how we want to live? How do we make spatial planning, urban planning, local development policies, economic promotion, the innovation drive, instruments to make this future for all people everywhere a real one? The European Bauhaus is an initiative of the European Commission. Its spirit goes well with the new Territorial Agenda 2030, approved during the German presidency of the European Union at the end of 2020. It goes well with the new European Bauhaus because it is about social and environmental sustainability. Spatial Foresight coordinated the work lasting 2 years to deliver this ambitious agenda. The growing inequalities between regions of Europe require strong action by all levels of governance. The European Union is ready to invest and to improve its regional policy. Local authorities are invited to act. Nevertheless, this action might not meet the needs of territories unless we promote, from the ground, an open approach that includes interdisciplinarity and collaborations. I hope we can bring some ideas to this debate today. Thank you again.
Roberto. Before we jump into the discussion and exchange with our very intriguing panel, we would like to briefly owner of the consultancy EPPC, and she's also a senior advisor on regional policy innovation and industry at the European Policy Center. Alison is working and living in Brussels, and as a real Scot, she also has a second home in Scotland. And when we exchanged a bit before this event, Alison emphasized the role of education to enable a future for all places. And Alison, maybe you can briefly say hello, and I would also ask you one question. If you think about your ideas you had before this event and you see the pictures here it's a compilation of different pictures. I would ask you which picture fits best your current mood when you think about territorial futures.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Christian, for the introduction. And it's very nice to see some familiar faces and some new ones. So I'm really happy to be here this afternoon. Thank you very much for the invitation. Yes, I think this is one of these conversations that, I'll be perfectly honest with you, it might depend on your own personal mood, how you respond to the questions that are being asked, and whether you're feeling particularly upbeat about what's happening, vis-a-vis, from my perspective, vis-a-vis EU policies, or whether you think they're maybe not going in the right direction. So from all of these pictures here, if I can just move my screen to have a look at all of them.
Just a very spontaneous association. It's not really like scientifically.
Sure. Probably the one on the bottom left-hand corner, with the pieces of the puzzle kind of coming together. Because sometimes I think they do come together, or sometimes they feel like they're coming together, and sometimes they don't. Maybe the distance between the pieces at this point is still a little bit bigger than I think those of us around the table today would like them to be. The question is whether we're heading in the right direction to piece those bits together in a better way. Christian, I don't know, did you want me to say something about the things that I sent in already, or is that for later?
That's for later. For the time being, we just would like to introduce the panel. So that's already perfect for our first shot. Thanks.
Okay,
Alison.
thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks, Alison. Then we're very happy to have on board also Viktor Suadrovsky, who is director of the ESCON EGTC, who works in Luxembourg, but lives kind of with one leg in Luxembourg and with one leg like in Blekinge in Sweden. And when we had our exchange before the meeting, Victor, you said when territorial cohesion is maybe more of a civilization norm, this kind of boycotts and rebellion accepted. So I found that quite an intriguing statement. I hope you push that further in the discussion today. But for you, also the same question as Christian had for Alison. Your mood right now and today, which of the pictures would you pick when you think about territorial futures?
Thank you very much, Kai. As of today, because you know, next week we are having a very important ESPON week, so we are extremely busy with all preparatory work for the our deliverables, publications, high-level policy debates, and so on. So my mind would immediately point at the piece to the right in the bottom side, which is a labyrinth, meaning not only myself, I feel a bit turmoiled in what kind of paths I'm supposed to follow and track and supervise, but also all the people around me. They are perhaps not in the maze as such, but this actually shows the kind of in a dynamic environment that we actually position ourselves in right now at this moment.
Okay. Thanks a lot and good luck for your event next week.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Victor. It's good to have you on board. Next, I would like to briefly introduce Andreu Ulied. Andreu is General Director of MCRIT Consultancy. Hello, Andreu. Andreu is working and living in Barcelona, and when we exchanged briefly via email before the event, Andreu said his main interests are post-territorialities. So how do today's administrative units and territorial structures, how does all this fit with future challenges, global challenges, European challenges? And the first thing that comes to my mind is, of course, the book from Andreas Faludi on the poverty of territorialism. So it's good to have you, Andreu, and also to you the question, when you take your today's mood, which picture reflects territorial futures for you? For me, you're still muted. Andreu, I can't hear you. Sorry.
Hi, sorry.
Yes.
Well, thanks for the introduction. My mood is, I will say, close to the picture number 4. So the one which is trying not to fall down. So all these objects making the best to keep, you know, a dynamic equilibrium, but it's kind of, we know that is not going to last this shape forever.
Thank you. I hope we can stabilize your picture during the session today, Andreu.
Yeah, yeah, it's a picture, but I think the viewer imagines that it's gonna collapse.
Yeah. So let's see what happens. Maybe Ariane König, one of our other panelists. We're very happy to have you on board, moving from Barcelona to Luxembourg and actually working in Luxembourg at the university as a senior researcher and living next village to where I'm hosted in Luxembourg. So we are almost neighbors. Very close by now in terms of territory. And here in the exchange, you, Ariane, said something very nicely about the question how humans relate, or how we as humans relate to ourselves, to others, and to the natural environment as being an important element for your work and your view on cohesion places. And in that sense, I would also like to ask you to say hello and what your mood on the territorial futures is today, right now. Ariane.
You are also muted, Ariane, sorry.
Hello, Kai. Hello, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to contribute. So I had real trouble choosing, but interconnectedness is what we're talking about in the face of existential challenges like the sixth mass extinction of species and the need to regenerate. So if we want a regenerative culture, just reducing harm is no longer enough. I think the second picture is clearly what resonates most with me today, and probably on all days, because in the end, it takes people who are ready to engage with each other for the common good if we want to achieve that, if we want to reverse the trend. I think we've had enough abstraction. I think we need action, local place-based action, and people who connect across places to learn from each other.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ariane. We hope we can contribute a bit. Probably we won't manage to get into action, but at least we contribute to networking today. Next on our panel, we have Asha Rogel. Asha, it's good to see you again, and I'm sorry for any mispronunciation of your last name. I'm very used to mispronunciations of my last name myself, so I hope that's fine. Asha is Deputy Director General at the Ministry of the Environment and Spatial Planning in Slovenia. She lives and works in Ljubljana, the beautiful capital of Slovenia. And when we exchanged before the event, Asha posed a very nice question, I found. She asked, what is a mountain hut in the city center and what is a skyscraper on the top of a mountain? And I think that was a very nice bridge of like thinking about urban areas and more rural, remote, mountainous regions, how to bring this together and what does it create in our head. So also to you, Asha, the question, when you see this selection of pictures, which reflects your current mood.
Thank you. Hello. The pronunciation was perfect. Thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to be with you. First of all, I was surprised to be invited because I always thought that Bauhaus means something for the architects and I'm just a geographer. But yeah, as you said, we create places together, right? And to be short, I would choose the picture number one, because for me, it's something that presents looking into the future also, not only to the places with the monoculars. And yeah, that would be my choice.
Thank you, Asher. So we do not only share funny last names, but also our background in geography, which makes it even nicer.
Well, thank you. And then we continue along the line and I'm personally extremely happy to have Kajsa Schmidt-Thomé on our panel today. And Kajsa works at Demos in Helsinki as a senior expert. She also lives in Helsinki. And in our pre-exchange, she posed the question whether we should only build new things in our world if they actually have a positive and regenerative effect on the planet and on us people. So Kajsa, I hope you can push that line later on in the discussion, but start with also your personal current mood on the futures and the selection of your picture.
Hello, hello, great to be here. Now that the picture 2 is taken and
you may take the same view.
No, that would be too easy. I'll kind of make it a bit more abstract because of, well, I'm interested in agency of different kind of actors to do change. So I see the now picture 3 as a kind of symbolic version of that, where the future kind of folds and unfolds through people bending it, kind of making it, molding the future. So I can see these openings there as like anybody can make a new opening in the future towards a better future. And if we do it simultaneously with those people of the picture 2, then we can really make a big difference.
Thank you. And then I hope we manage today to bend a little bit further here.
Next on our panel, we have Elisa Vilares. And first of all, thanks a lot for joining us today, Elisa, because we have to emphasize that today is a national holiday in Portugal. So instead of joining the national festivities, Elisa decided to join us, and I hope you won't regret it that you choose this event. So thanks a lot for being with us. Elisa is head of Division of Territorial Development and Urban Policy at the Portuguese Directorate General for Territory. She's working in Lisbon, but she's not living in Lisbon. She's living in a neighboring town by the ocean, which sounds already quite amazing to me, living in a flat area in Northwest Europe without any direct sea. And before this event, Elisa shared a very, I would say, vivid description of her daily commute. I will just briefly summarize it. So it includes walking in the neighborhood through a public garden, along the seaside, public white sand beach, local library and a church. But then she also has to change to a train along the seaside, which again sounds very beautiful to me. But then she takes a bus and has to wait for her bus connection and goes through a more marginalized neighborhood of Lisbon. So it sounds like a very interesting, very contrasting impressions that you experience basically every day. And I would also like to ask you what picture best reflects your current mood when you think about these futures and your background and your daily commuting.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you also for inviting me and for being here. I'm really glad to be here as in my own national day, which I have to say I went through quite an existential angst when with all the questions that were posed to me, because the first question is, who are you? You know, and I just deflected it, but I think it was quite appropriate, because instead of saying who am I said, where do I live? What's the experiences I have? Where I'm grounded, you know? And so this was in essence my attempt, you know, to move away from this existential angst, which would lead me, you know, as Asha was led into this first picture of the lens, you know, looking forward. But looking forward is just anxiety, you know, that's what it is, you know. It's this sort of, it's not just the ecological disasters, it's sort of this post-human world that might be on the horizon. So I try to be very grounded in my own perception of the places I live and the beauty that it's embedded in all of it. So I would like very much, and this is my should I say, optimistic resistance to also to choose number 2. Even though I do think, you know, we are anxious, we are terrified, we are not happy, you know, we're not cheerful. So this is also my my sort of a contradictory inside my own labyrinth, should I say.
I think we all understand and share probably your feeling of ambivalence, probably it is a bit, especially in these current times and still difficult times of the pandemic. I can totally understand it, but I hope today we will create a nice environment for some more harmonious discussions, still contradicting maybe, or yeah, interesting discussions, let's say.
Yes, well, thanks for being with us, Elisa, in particular as it's a day off for you. Moving to a completely different part of Europe, we have Dritan Schutina with us, and Dritan is Executive Director of CoPlan in Tirana. He lives and works there in Tirana, and a topic that concerns him very much is actually the power structure of the new Europe and how that will look. And I guess also that with the perspective of a person living in a non-EU member state. Dritan, what picture then would the current mood of yours be when you look about territorial futures?
Thank you, Kai, for the opportunity to be with you. You know, when this future of Europe was posed as a question, I was thinking, are we talking for administrative Europe or natural Europe? Because all this discussion between Europe, the Balkan countries, part of Europe, where do they stand, power struggles between regional actors and so on. So from that perspective, actually, I don't have one picture, but I would say the two pictures, the equilibrium and the mass, will more or less describe the mood I'm in, because actually we have to balance national, regional, and European, let's say, dynamics, while at the same time we are moving in a maze, actually with a very difficult, because in a maze always the challenge is to find the way out. And for us, European perspective is the way out, but eventually that way out gets mixed with so many other things, and eventually we feel like we'll be forever in a maze. So that's more or less the mood I would describe myself in.
Thank you very much, and happy to having you on board for today.
Yes, hello, Dritan. And next on our panel, we have Oksana Soimu. She's a consultant at Infide in the Basque Country. She's working and living in Bilbao. And when we exchanged before today, Oksana wrote that territorial cohesion must be built from best practices in policy design. And I would maybe add policy delivery as well. And I think it's a quite clear message and a very true message. And probably all of us would agree that we need more best, or let's say good practices in policy, and need to exchange on this, so to disseminate such practices. Oksana, also for you the question, which picture reflects best your current mood when you think about territorial futures?
Good afternoon to everybody. So thank you, Christian, for this description. At the first sight, so the first picture that is very close to my thinking and to my mood, I think I wouldn't change it, is the brainstorming. This is because I think that in order to reach excellence in the future of territories, the dialogue, the involvement, it's very important. And this dialogue and involvement could be generated through different ideas. No, this is not about the geography only, and not about only the economy. This is about the society. This is about education. So a brainstorming from different areas. This is my vision for the future.
Thank you, Oksana.
And I think, actually, I think our meeting today, this is also a kind of brainstorming. Why not?
That would exactly be my point, saying, okay, probably we contribute today to this, such a brainstorming exercise. So it's good to have you here, and thank you for being with us.
Okay.
Yes, and last but not least, we have Thomas Böhme with us, and I'm extremely happy to have Thomas on board as he gives another dimension to the discussion here. Thomas is Director of Legislative Works of a number of different commissions within the European Committee of the Regions. Then it goes without saying that he is placed in Brussels. But yesterday I also learned that he is actually the one that is probably closest to Bauhaus of the group here, as he has a history in Sachsen-Anhalt and he could tell me many details about the original Bauhaus. So a very knowledgeable player on Bauhaus, but also on cohesion. And for me, Thomas always stands for the big question, how to ensure that we have cohesion and to ensure that we have a cohesion spirit or a cohesion as a value for European policy making. Thomas, also to use a question about the picture which best reflects your current mood on territorial futures.
Yeah, first of all, thanks inviting me. I am very happy to be with you because it's a real exchange from different angles. Indeed, I've been director for the Sachsen-Anhalt office in Brussels for 15 years. And Dessau, the World Heritage Site, is in my region. So I have a direct link not only to, let's say, the region, but also the Bauhaus Foundation and others, and to bring in some of this. Actually, also my office in Brussels, the Bauhaus building in Brussels, but designed by somebody who was a Bauhaus member. Representation, which was the former embassy of the GDR in Brussels, was done by a Bauhaus member or pupil, and it's part of the archive. So when you want to visit Bauhaus in real life, go in the Boulevard Saint-Michel in the office of the former GDR embassy, which is now some of the East German Länder. But for me, my mood is the first one on the left with the looking in the future, but also the second from the bottom, from the fog. We have clarity of one thing, but we see through the clarity sometimes also the fog and the unclarity. What is the new normal? So, so in this sense, I'm really keen to listen and I will give some comment. Some personal reflection I have to say, because this is taped. I will not do this on behalf of the Committee of the Region, but in my personal capacity. I'm very happy to see so many friends in this room. So I'm really looking forward to this.
Thank you very much, Thomas. I'm also very happy having you on board. And let's see whether the fog gets denser or lighter over the next hours. What we would like to do is kind of really think about what Groupius would do now 100 years later, thinking about territorial cohesion and places or a future for all places. And by that, linking the Bauhaus discussion on the one hand to the Treaty of the European Union, where we have territorial cohesion as an objective, but also to the territorial agenda that was approved last year, looking at the future for all places. And then can we think that differently? As if we free ourselves from all the restrictions of our daily work and practicalities, can we think more radical about it and say, what would we put forward if we were Groupius today? So from that side, I hope that the discussion today does not only stand realistic, but we dare going out and being a little bit wild and really remember what Thomas just highlighted. Everybody here is participating as individual person and not speaking for any kind of institution they are coming from. So that's for me very important to make that sure. What we would like to do is in probably 3 rounds pose questions about territorial cohesion, the way it could look like, but also the way we could work on it and implement it, and get a number of reflections from the panelists, except for Roberto and Thomas. And we will at the end invite Thomas and then also Roberto to reflect from what they have heard from their 2 different dimensions, saying, well, that was really too radical, or guys, you could do better on that, and what you picked from that. So that is what we would like to do. And as you have seen already, Christian and me will share the job here. And see where we can get you. And we will really ask you to stay very short in your responses so that we have some time for discussion later on. And with that, I would hand over to you, Christian, for introducing a new set of pictures.
Yes, we can't get enough for pictures, so we just have another collection. Maybe it's important to say that before the event, we asked all of you to send us a picture that reflects, or could represent a radical idea of territorial cohesion. And we now compiled them, and thanks to all of you for sending us very diverse pictures. So it's very nice to have very different elements covered here. And in the first round, I would ask each of you to briefly reflect not on one single picture, but on the entire collection. So in its totality, the pictures, what do they tell you about, or what could they tell you about the new radical idea of territorial cohesion, of a future for all places? And we would do it basically based on your first names from A to Z, so very logical order, and simply again start with Alison. Alison, if you would like to start, you think about a radical new idea of cohesion. What does this collection of pictures tell you?
Thank you, Christian. I think it's an excellent list of images, and I think there's a lot in there. There's a lot for me about possibility, about opportunity. But there's an awful lot of complexity in there as well, because I think the reality is that we do live in a very complex world. And that's not just at a global level, it's also at a local level. And I think that as policymakers, and certainly from my personal perspective, living in an environment where EU policymaking is at the core of that, I think that sometimes we forget about the complexity of that for the people who are on the receiving end, the people who at the end of the day live and work in different places. And I speak particularly about Europe here because that's where my knowledge is. I couldn't pretend to be able to speak for the world, although some of this is of course very relevant for the world. And I think there are some positives in this. I think that most recently, particularly probably in the wake of the health pandemic, even though that's a terrifying backdrop, there has been some new EU interest in the role of territory. We hear much more about place-based policymaking, sensitivity to impacts of policies at a local level, which in some ways is heartening. In some ways, the cynic in me says, is this just rhetoric? But I also see a change even in the style and in the policy-making direction, even in places like the OECD. And I find that enormously heartening. I think that's incredibly positive. The focusing a little bit more on where I'm coming from, and I speak here about a very personal background because before, a long time before I came to Brussels, I started my working life as a teacher. And for me, the concept of education and what's education's purpose is still at the core of, I think, what we all have to do on a day-to-day basis, what is important. And I think that often we fail to understand what the demand side is for education, not just the supply side. The supply side is what we can often want it to be, but the demand side is the thing that we often miss around what citizens, parents, teachers, businesses, etc., what they are looking for from a system, which is supposed to not just generate educated individuals, but a better society. And within this, I think that we have different roles to play in the future. And something that I'm particularly interested in is public sector innovation and how we can transform public sector at all levels of government and governance to better understand the influence that they have with policy making, because it has an enormous impact on people's lives. And I have worked in several places across the EU where I think they have been very inspiring around the processes that they use for engaging people in processes of engagement. So it's not just about the final outcome, what a building looks like, what a place looks like, what a space looks like. It's the process of getting there. because you can come up with the nicest, most beautiful tech-oriented building in the world in a place that doesn't really have much enthusiasm behind it because it wasn't a shared vision to getting to that point. So this idea of sharing, the idea of engagement, of ownership, of civic pride, etc. I think these are things that we often overlook as policymakers. And so I think that's probably at the core of what I've been thinking about in preparation for today's discussion.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Many interesting points like complexity that we sometimes we forget about, and also the role of and the purpose of education. I think that's a very interesting question. What are we actually aiming at when we discuss education? I would now give the floor to Andreu. Andreu, when you look at this collection of images, what does it tell you about a radical idea on territorial cohesion in Europe?
Yes, I'm muted.
No, we can hear you. No, we can't hear you anymore. Now your camera is off. I think now you should, for a short moment you were unmuted. I think now you're muted again. Andreu, are you still with us? Ah. Now we can see you, but I can't hear you. So 50%. Yes. Oh. Yeah. Yes. Great.
Okay. Okay. So you asked for radical ideas. So I think there are two. Maybe there are plenty, but I can only figure out two radical ideas. Meaning something that will change cohesion policies as we understand them until now. I think the first thing is the relation with the neighboring countries. I think the cohesion problem we have, as well as opportunities with the neighboring countries. So there are hundreds of millions of young Africans willing to come to Europe, and I think maybe in terms of income, the disparities between the average African, other African person and average European person is huge. I don't know if it's 10 times, so it's huge. So this is the challenge in terms of cohesion. I mean, otherwise, if we want to talk about redistribution of funding within European countries, between European regions, maybe we have to change the name, not calling cohesion this policy. It's just redistribution, whatever, but it's not actually cohesion in terms of solving disparities that are threatening I would say the safety, the well-being, very fundamental elements, also related to ethical issues. So for me, cohesion in the future and reduction of disparity should be related to the neighboring countries. We can talk also the whole world, but at least neighboring countries is, there are people dying on the Mediterranean. So we are doing the same that Donald Trump with the world, just that we have the water, but it's the same thing. It's very much the same thing. And the second radical change I think we have to talk about is governance. In the drawing that Kuzman suggested many years ago, which is the Europe of grapes, or the Europe of cities, the Europe of regions, whatever, is a Europe where the power is bottom up. So cities and regions are in charge of many policies, let's say. We reorganize states because some states are too big for the small problems and too small for the big problems and opportunities. So more European integration, and at the same time more decentralization on urban regions, let's say. So both are utopias, maybe. The first one is, I think, indispensable if we are serious in our ethical commitments and our values. And the second one is highly convenient. So there are radical ideas. Maybe there are others, but these one are radicals enough for me to share with you.
Yeah, thanks, Andreu, especially for also shedding some light on the neighborhood dimension. I think very often we discuss Europe and we think about it as a remote, isolated island. And although it is surrounded by water in many directions, of course, there's a high level of interdependencies. And as you said, there are on a daily basis, disasters basically happen at our shores. And I think that's important to keep in mind. I would now like to hand over to Ariane and also to you the question, when you see this collection of pictures, what does it tell you about a radical idea for cohesion in Europe?
Thank you, Christian. If I look at this collection of pictures, I'm amazed at their complementarity and perfect fit in terms of where we should look for a better future. And this also tells us something about the power of collective intelligence and gathering people of different backgrounds and fine orchestration, what role it can play to achieve positive environmental impacts. That's one of my key words. How can we get a regenerative culture to take a foothold in our societies and to spread? I think people are ready. And I think we do need to think about relation to nature and rebuilding nature and agency and opening up rooms for action for everyone to engage. And I think indigenous knowledge will harbor invaluable secrets on how to regenerate healthy ecosystems where there's a lot of pollution now. So what I foresee and the changes or my vision of the future to achieve this in Europe would be to have place-based experimentation on how we can contribute to enriching biodiversity in view of climate change and accelerating change locally, wherever we stand, and everyone can engage. But at the same time, doing this in a networked manner with experiments and a network of living laboratories who can learn from each other, who are set up to learn from each other. So part of this equation are much more flexible financial instruments that open up rooms for urban dwellers, citizens, for agriculture and farmers, but also for forest keepers and nature parks to engage on rebuilding a healthy biosphere, if need be, with new drought-resistant species. We may not be able to come around that. And then to network these with citizen science apps, for once take advantage of our networked society and mobiles to co-create knowledge for participatory governance that starts with participatory sensing of our environment, participatory analysis and interpretation of the data. It will be a new statistical mode of producing evidence for policies in a co-created manner, and then seeing what different places with very different needs, where you have local experience on top, abstract expertise on tap extremely carefully. So how can we get there? Basically, but they are networked and they can learn from each other. That's my vision.
Mm-hmm. Thanks a lot, Ariane. And I also see a link to what Andreu said before, emphasizing this bottom-up character of cohesion and giving room for experimentation and like living laboratories as a field where people can try out things and can try to implement change, actually. So I think that's very interesting points. And then I would hand over now to Asha and ask Asha, although I do not, no, there you are, sorry. I thought you were gone for a second. Now I found you again. Asha, please, also to you the question, what does this collection of pictures tell you, please?
Yeah, you know, for me, a really radical idea that it's also connected to all of those pictures here, or at least with most of them, is that thinking really radically, I would say that what if we turn everything around, you know, like my statement you read, what if we set the mountain hut in the middle of the city? And what if we set the skyscraper on the top of the mountain? And if we look at them, do they really belong there, and how they will act, how they will feel? So for me, really radical would be in the cohesion, that not everything would be invested in concrete, but more into the people, more into their perspectives, especially into young people, because I think that a really radical idea would be that young people would be leading policies for 7 years, and that maybe we are already the older generation and we would step back and allow them to say what they see, because when I hear them in many cases, you know, they would the digital things they just use, but the future they see in really healthy nature and in environment, and how this is how they see their social cohesion, you know, that better world for them. And I think it's our responsibility to start thinking in different way. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thanks a lot, Asha. Very, very interesting points. Like you mentioned surprise. I would say like breaking with expectations. Like what do we usually assume, and then really try to creating some kind of disruptions. And of course also the involvement of the young people. I think that's quite important. I mean, we see it in different movements, but it would be really an interesting approach to really let them rule things. It would probably imply some challenges or some problems, democratic problems, but it would nevertheless be definitely a radical idea and a very nice experiment. After Asha, I would now ask Dritan the same question. If you see this collection of pictures, what does it tell you about a radical idea about territorial cohesion?
As I see the pictures, you can say that they are all homocentric, almost all of them homocentric. In a sense, for good and for bad. In a sense, it shows on one side what we can do, and at the same time shows what we could end up being if we don't take corrective actions. And from that in mind, it shows also, as I read, the power that we have to reflect and eventually correct ourselves down the road. And from that perspective, I have always this kind of conflict. I see always this kind of conflict that we try to reinvent ourselves, and eventually I even say that where we are, we even need to create a new value system. But even when we create new values, we always build the governance structure that we build to carry out change. Eventually, instead of conveying values, it conveys power. And usually a lot of conflicts that we have and pictures try to depict there, it's again this kind of conflict that is inherited there. And from my viewpoint, there is a conflict even within ourselves, in a sense that we are still very kind of, I'd say, very utilitarian in our behavior, though we kind of advocate that, you know, we have to behave differently and so on, but still, to a large extent, if again, we see communities at large, not only individuals, they are still even struggling with themselves. And of course, there is a raised consciousness that we really need to look to this place-based approach and how we could empower communities and so on. But for me, again, the weak link is how we are going to empower those communities. With what kind of system will be put in place that they are not going to impose, but they are going to actually nurture more values, new system references and so on. And for that, I always refer to this harmony that we need to bring. If we try to see the composition so far, we have, I mean, people are represented by I mean, in the European arena, countries are represented by, people are represented by other representatives, and what they represent not always represent people. They represent groups of interest, but how the priorities are determined in this power negotiation. And again, it's power negotiation, and the strongest message that comes out is the one that, you know, has had more resources to put their message and so on. And to put it in a more positive context, I really hope that we would have this harmonious music where you will have a really interaction at the community level, free of, let's say, dogma or free of regulations in terms of how they need to interact with them. And again, we talk about places, but those places always belong to an administrative thing, which is governed by a certain administrative body. I'm not saying that they are not needed, but those usually exercise power. They don't nourish really kind of exchange and so on. I mean, we can elaborate more on that, but that's what I'd be my interpretation of the figure so far.
Thanks a lot, Ritan. I think, again, very relevant points when you mention the downside of representation and power. And I think it links to many aspects that have been mentioned before. Sometimes I wonder if we really have more bottom-up approaches, more power to the people, if we really will see the change that we all somehow desire so much, or whether if we really let people decide if they are maybe more reluctant about change. But that's maybe another question, or maybe a question for later. Now I would like to give the floor to Elisa again, and also ask you, what does this collection of pictures tell you about a new radical idea for territorial cohesion?
Yes. Thank you very much, and especially thanks for speaking after Dritten, because I truly recognize myself in that speech, and I'm going to be very literal here. A radical idea has to be ideological. So if we are really going to talk about radical ideas, it's about severe institutional change. You know, it's not, it does not, it really depends on a radical new, not a radical idea to change the world, but a radical idea of seeing the world. And my conundrum here, and I'm also having the conundrum that Ritan has, in essentially, I think we are in a neurotic loop of efficiency, of novelty, of, you know, pushing everything, because up front, you know, our future self is always much better than ourselves, and especially this loop of efficiency, you know, as efficiency has become an end in itself. And here is what I see that Groupius wouldn't really have anything to say right now, because he did not experience this afterwards, you know, really need to experience this sort of neurotic efficiency that we're in. And here is my conundrum, because we are talking about ideology. Here we are all very much in tune, you know, I would like to sing Kumbaya to all of us, you know, we're very much in tune, we're very much, you know, optimistic about it, making new proposals. But here is the thing, how can we, knowing ourselves, you know, and loving ourselves, you know, as human beings, can face with this sort of, how can we be more grounded and more place-based, and also more knowledge of the other, because this is itself a contradiction, I think. You know, the more you are embedded in your own community, and this is the image I chose to try to portray the opposition of it, is how can we, you know, actually by recognition of the other, but it has to be one, a systematic recognition of the other, an exposure, a systematic exposure to the other, and also this sort of this recognition of this common anxiety. Again, I go back to the anxiety, but this common vulnerability, you know, that's, you know, but even that, I don't think, I'm not really sure, you know, and that's the other thing. If you really want to have a radical idea, we need to have time, which is something that we never seem to have ourselves. Not time, you know, to actually, you need to act now, it's this sense of urgency, but also time to be vulnerable in that thinking, you know, to dive into, you know, to actually go and be utterly vulnerable in our own values, you know, and this is the contradiction. We are more than complexity. We are facing a terrible paradox in terms of time and space. I see, you know, so I have no ideas because I did not have the time, you know, to have that radical idea on that. So.
Well, thanks a lot for emphasizing that there are some contradictions and some conflicts. I mean, with nice words, we won't be able to solve it. And we have also to identify these spots where we say, okay, actually, all this sounds nice, but probably it will entail some conflicts and we will have to discuss them. We will have to, as you said, we'll have to face each other. We will have to recognize each other in this. So I think that's a very interesting point as well. Kaiser would be next now. Kaiser, and also to you the question, what does this picture tell you about a radical idea for territorial cohesion?
Yes, thanks. I'd like to actually go to the question about what would Groupius do, and well, maybe while looking at these pictures, I think he might have to rethink the kind of the promise of the modernity that he believed, so kind of, yeah, that he believed in, and maybe follow like what Asha said about kind of taking a step backwards and giving in that you can't really like you can't build a better future just by building it, or by producing things that are maybe like that are nice and beautiful and kind of provide kind of holistic modernistic lifestyle. He might give in that the mass production of these kind of modern items was a kind of wrong direction to take. It probably didn't know that about all the limits of resources. Maybe we can't blame him for ignoring climate change happening, but he might now give that in. There's huge damage has been done in the name of progress, kind of tangible progress especially, and he would maybe be kind of the radical thing would be like, okay, the future should be more and more intangible but still joyful. So he would try to maybe make sense how to utilize everything that has been extracted and brought into use already for the future benefit. So kind of not minimizing new tangible things in the world, or at least limiting it to the thing, kind of to the materials that we have already extracted. And I think this would actually like be a cohesion, from the cohesion perspective, this would be a good move, because nowadays the like the resource incentive kind of capitalist economy is centered on the cities and city regions that are the economic engines. But if the cities and these engines would kind of be limited in the use of resources, kind of taking new resources into the games, they would not have. They would also have to face the limits of growth, not just those that are not growing anymore. Like it would kind of equalize the picture in Europe if it was kind of only allowed to build if it adds something to the common good. Maybe that's the point.
Yeah, thanks a lot again for this emphasis on the environmental side, and on really, like, if we discuss it radically, then we of course also have to reflect on what went wrong so far, or as Dritan already said, like we need to correct things. And I see your comment going in the same or in the similar direction there, and putting a stronger focus on intangible things, as Asha said, like invest in people, not in concrete or in buildings. So thanks a lot, Kaiser. I would then next ask Oksana to share your view on this collection of pictures, and what does it tell you about a radical idea for territorial cohesion?
Well, many ideas have been said already, but I really like the picture about orchestration, because I imagine that the capacity of Europe to achieve orchestration of external policy with internal or national, let's say, objectives of member states, it's really complicated. Maybe it's impossible, but maybe it's possible. And I think that something could be done maybe in terms of strategic governance. I was thinking that if yesterday, let's say, yesterday we were talking about jobs and wealth in territories. Now, after pandemic, we already are talking about jobs, wealth, and health, right? So we are double preoccupied, because it's really related among them. We speak about more about climate, we speak more about sustainability, we speak about technology. So a radical idea, this is about to achieve this orchestration of different policies in different areas. And I imagine that it's really, really difficult. And I imagine to orchestrate internal policy and internal EU vision with external challenges. It's also difficult, but maybe it's possible. Let's see.
Thanks a lot. I like the your image or your metaphor of the orchestra, and that we need some kind of strategic governance to orchestrate. But probably we don't need like one strong person in the front who's doing everything, but it needs to be in a more organic way. And of course, fully agree. The pandemic has momentum that really, at the moment, that really emphasized more, like, I think a word that was mentioned before is grounded us a bit, and emphasized what does really matter, like health and healthy environments. So I think that's a very nice contribution. Thanks, Oksana. And then last but not least, of course, I would ask Victor to also share your views with us on this collection, and what do you think about a radical idea for territorial cohesion for Europe? Please, Victor.
Thank you. That's an interesting collection, I would say, and we may grasp here some sites. We can see nature, we can see plants, we can see people, and probably we see some dynamism, like the charts in the right upper corner. So my question probably goes in a similar direction, or my observation, my reflection, that perhaps it is about harmony between the different elements, which is not that radical per se, but if we are able then to perhaps put some quasi-equation mark between the harmony and territorial cohesion, is it equivalent that by territorial cohesion, this holy grail, we mean harmony to what we are, each of us is heading for in her or his own way? which then brings me up to the question if territorial cohesion or harmony is subjective, is a subject to individual perceptions, that some other people might say we are definitely not having a harmony, while I would say in my nearest circle, I live a harmonious life. I'm happy. I don't want anyone else to meddle with my business. So collectivism versus individualism, where the territorial cohesion is about, is it just a sum of individualisms, or is it the imposed collectivism that we need to, together, all places, all people, go into the direction that is determined? And if determined by whom? Who determines the state of territorial cohesion that is acceptable, that everyone subscribes to? Is it my harmony, or is the harmony of the people my own harmony? That is why I picked up actually this interesting symbolic picture in the very middle. This is the one by famous Polish art painter Zbigniew Beksiński, where you can see the pillars and people sitting there around campfires. So you can say, is it a gloomy picture of territorial cohesion, or is it a picture of coziness for territorial cohesion? Because these people might feel happy. We don't need them to understand that they aspire for something more, as long as they accept that they live in harmony, they live in coziness. So this was my sort of a very, original issue with territorial cohesion. What is in fact the territorial cohesion? Do we want it? Do we all want it in the same way? Or is it individual? Is it based on my own perceptions and my subjective feelings about what I want in my life? Is my life harmonious? Is my life good enough? Thank you.
Very much, Victor. I quite like your view on harmony. Also your last question about what do we actually want as person, as individual, with cohesion or with territorial cohesion. And listening to all of you, I would even go further than you, Oksana, did in saying yesterday when we talked about cohesion, we talked about wealth, we talked about jobs, and now we have also the health issue in. But listening really how all of you described your ideas around cohesion, for me, it had quite a number of features which go far beyond what we used to discuss as cohesion, which maybe are more radical than they sound. There was quite a strong focus on people, on individuals, on persons. Victor, even that kind of my, but also Alison, Ariane, Asha, Elisa very much put a focus on saying we're actually talking about people and what they do. So it's more almost not economic, social, territorial, but it's also economic, social, territorial, and I don't know, people cohesion, if you want, or interpersonal cohesion. So I think there is something I would like later on to get a little bit more into and saying, what would that mean and how can we operationalize that? Then I think there was another group, that second topic, which was very much, let's say, about the administrative governance, where we talked about institutional change, the orchestra of different policies, but also about borders within Europe and borders outside of Europe, saying we actually have an administrative system which guides us in thinking often or acting, and which also defines how we see cohesion and what maybe hampers cohesion to a certain extent. And then there's the last one, which was touched, I think, most explicitly by you guys, are talking about intangibles. So we are used and trained to think about tangibles, measurable, very quantifiable. Sorry, Victor, if you can't put it on the map for ESPON later, but having something much more intangible. And for me, a lot of what was said earlier by various of you about nature and people actually fits into that. So I would like to use the next half hour to dwell a little bit around those kind of people, intangibles, and the administrative dimension. What actually, if we pick those, cohesion would mean for Europe, or how could we put that into practice? And basic feeling as well, being a spatial planner, having worked a lot with European maps, for me, cohesion is always kind of a map where I distribute something. But that I didn't hear. So it seems to be much more active processes. So from that side, I maybe would go over to that and saying, if we take those ideas and put them into practice, how would the process look like in an ideal case? Or maybe you have an initiative, a policy where you say, well, basically they already do it. Maybe look at that. And I now pick kind of randomly a little bit, a few of you for comments to see whether we get that going. I guess that's easier than trying to raise hands here. But Ariane, you talked very much about the place-based regenerational aspect, but you also talked about experimentation, meaning kind of trying new things, going beyond what we see. And I know that in your work also, you work a lot with living labs and citizen society. So if you build on that and give me 3 or 5 key elements or keywords mainly to be short, what would be the elements that you say for territorial cohesion as a process? What do we need to learn and consider?
Thank you, Kai. I think room for reflection and negotiation on trade-offs if we really push for value change. So that's one definite keyword, and that also links to intangibles. This would have social real spaces locally. I think the municipal level that Roberto Gomez also mentioned in the beginning would play a role, but it would also have a virtual networking dimension. I think knowledge is an issue we need to wrestle with. We need to get better at, we need tools as well as processes that allow us to understand each other across different areas of expertise and different silos, because we need systemic change across technologies, infrastructures, legislation, everything that makes us relate to each other. Sorry, I hope that was clear enough. So we need ways to better combine place-based knowledge with more abstract knowledge and local negotiation about general technologies that are available to all of us.
Thank you. No, but that kind of negotiation part I like quite a lot. I think we maybe can pick on that a little bit later.
Whoops, we can't hear you. You're suddenly muted.
Sorry, Kaisa, that kind of reads my mind as I had her second on my list here, and you raised immediately your hand. I guess Ariane picked a few points on the intangibles. So if you maybe can dwell on that and really see kind of how to make that happen, to think more about intangibles.
Maybe 2 directions. Why I actually kind of raised my hand immediately was the reaction to the experimentation issue, like then stressing the role of imagination, like kind of, okay, negotiation is another direction, but imagination is also one. And then I have to maybe kind of do a small advertisement for my colleagues who have built this kind of untitled community, which is kind of, it's a 10-year process that tries to imagine futures and then experiment with solutions that can lead to those. I can't probably say it's only intangible, but it strongly is about people and not so much about kind of building a new world from something tangible. So it's basically like, okay, imagine, experiment, learn from it, and repeat. But then about the intangibles, the other direction, of course, like one concrete direction which is pretty much on the European agenda is the circular economy thing. But put it more radically still, I don't know, that would be worth further thinking. I guess it has to do with also with regulation that has been mentioned earlier, that you kind of just set ambitious limits, and then also the market starts to function, because the market is probably not so actively taking steps towards the more intangible world, because the rules of competition but once the rules are the same for all competitors, so the regulation gets harsher, there's also kind of need to innovate and need to push the limits of kind of bring the new kind of circular economy really to exist. So it also kind of really radically reduces the use of materials and kind of steers our attention to new ways to utilize all the things we have already extracted. But this doesn't make it very concrete yet.
Okay, no, but I think it takes that one step further, and I would actually play that ball further to Alison. In a way, you mentioned people engagement, civic pride. In our pre-talks, you even said something about legitimized activism, which for me falls into that imagine, experiment, negotiate, and think differently. Do you have any ideas, kind of, again, 3-4 words of how that could be translated into something that helps us putting a future for all places more into practice?
Thanks, Kai. Yes, I have some thoughts on this, but they're maybe not quite in the same direction as everyone else's. I really liked what Ariane said about the room for negotiation on the trade-offs and tools to facilitate this. And I think this is where we struggle, because I think what I had written down quite close to the beginning of this conversation is that I think broadly in this group, in this conversation, we seem to share a broad vision. But I think that we probably diverge on what needs to happen to achieve this and what it might look like. And then the question of, do you have radical ideas? And my question is more, do we need radical ideas? Do we actually need shifts to improve concrete realities for people that are really not that radical? And I don't say that because I'm a traditional person and I don't think anything needs to change. But it comes back to, what does success look like? And I think that we need to unpack some of that a bit. And I go back to something that was said at the beginning of the session on indigenous knowledge, and that maybe it's probably my lack of ignorance, but that term actually I'm a bit concerned about it, because the activation of indigenous knowledge is at the core of what we're discussing, but it can be incredibly difficult to generate, because the most able in our societies can and will engage with these conversations. They have the agency, they have the resources, they have access, they have confidence. But there's a danger in that we actually create much further fragmentation and inequality in what we're doing, because people actually perceive very different personal prospects. So we have very different baselines of not just engagement, but we have very different baselines of where do we start from? And your personal perception of this matters a great deal. And while it might sound incredibly negative to say, I don't believe that everyone is actually ready to just engage with the kinds of efforts that we're talking about today. And the idea of imposed interventions could then become very, very counterproductive. So I think we have to be a bit careful about that. And I think linked to that, when we think about differentiated support at local levels, at the very beginning of the day, somebody mentioned something about your locality, where you come from, and what the background is there. And it made me think about economic structures in places where we all live or work. And the influences there can be incredibly positive or negative, because there are historical endowments there that are positive and negative. And these are incredibly sticky, for better or for worse. And local citizens are sometimes not even aware of that history or that context, or why they find themselves in a position of relative wealth, or indeed of relative poverty. So the economic structure matters a great deal. We can't really move away from that, which also brings me to the point about digitalization. Is digitalization a good thing or is it a bad thing? Because it can actually be both. It can accelerate the winners and losers, as conversations that we've had before, talking about territorial cohesion. And also this word of creativity, that means different things to very different people in very different places. It can also be incredibly intimidating. And one of the, I suppose one of the things that this occurs to me, because I've said quite a lot of negative things, I don't want to end negatively, but I was thinking about the role of architects. What do we mean by an architect? An architect is not just someone who designs a building. And the analogy I'd probably draw there is how we now view, in the context of the health pandemic, the role of public health practitioners, who I think in the past have had quite a kind of defined role of what they do, who they work with and what they actually deliver. And in the context of the health pandemic, we've all been really encouraged to reinvent that job, to understand about what it means, about data, about evidence, about working with others. And I think we need to reinvent what we mean by architecture, because it's not about public buildings, it's about people, it's about processes, it's about engagement, it's about all of those things. It's not a private sector job. It's a role for everybody. So yeah, sorry, I'm probably meandering quite a bit, so I'll stop there.
No, thanks, Alison. I think for me, you gave us two very important reminders. So one is that if we say we want to have more engagement of people, people need to be ready for it and need to have the capability to do that. And that varies quite heavily across our society. Some of them happy to do that, able to do that, others less. At the same time, it also matters where we live, because where we live shapes which conditions we are for jobs and all kinds of other pleasures we have. So, and that makes me now wanting to talk to Elisa and Victor at the same time, but I take them in order to make sure we can hear each other. I start with Elisa. In a way, what Alison started off saying, do we really need radical ideas? And you said in the beginning, maybe we don't need a radical idea, but we need to be more clear on the radicalism of an idea and the ideology of an idea and the institutional change related to it. But in our pre-talks, you also mentioned democracy as one of those ideas we really need to get clearer on. And maybe you can dwell a little bit further on that before I then shift over to Victor after you.
Yes. Again, have to be, for being radical, you need to really assert the radical idea of ideas that are here. And democracy is a radical idea in itself, because it is radical in the sense, and here we have to be unapologetical about it. It's the radicalism of the fundamental equality of the status of each human being, its validity, its recognition. But also let me tell you, and again, we go back to what are the institutional changes and the economic changes that we really need to face in front of this, face of this radical idea of itself and the relevance of human speech and of human agency. But let me just say yet another thing, because you said I've seemed very anxious because of the pandemic. I'm not very anxious because of the pandemic. Actually, I thought I found myself to be more resilient just because I've experienced a decade before of crisis. So my anxiety pertains more to the fact that I see all my adult life in crisis. So I've been in the labor market crisis when I was young. Then I went to the financial crisis. Then there is this pandemic crisis. But no, let's look at the future. You have the greater crisis of it all. So that's what I say. Well, do embrace this. You know, it's not a bad thing. Anxiety is not a bad thing. My post-human, my dystopia of a post-human world is this idea that you can have a machine to make you feel good. You know, it's just a matter of mental status. You just adjust it, and you know, reality sucks. But hey, you have the pill for it. No, let's face it. You know, it's a really in your face kind of thing. You know, talking about the intangibles, okay, but then let's talk about what is really happening. You know, into our capacity to actually be creative. How can I be creative if I have to systematically think that I have a bill to pay, or that I have a precarious job, or that anything, you know? Or how can I really be creative in such a space of unsafety, you know? And this is, again, my question more than an idea for it, you know?
But for me, I think the idea is, yeah, the anxiety, but also your machine, the machine to feel good, saying, okay, that is actually what matters for cohesion. Then you can go through kind of multiple crises in your life, but if you have that feel good element, and that's something that Victor, you also picked on actually in your first statement, and then it is about the harmony and about me feeling that I'm in harmony with my life and the world, and not anybody telling me. So that's this kind of feel good is also something very subjective, which maybe makes it difficult to find a European-wide accepted definition and set of indicators on it. But Victor, can you address that a little bit first? Because in a way, talking about that collectivism versus individualism, feel good, there's also the phrase of an acceptable future. So what is actually acceptable, and what makes it that we as individuals feel happy in that?
We are connecting and linking up a lot of elements here, and again, using this metaphor of a maze or a labyrinth, I can see that there are individual entangled paths, but they are within the same framework, the same frame in that sense, right, which is the shape of the labyrinth. So probably there is a chance for something that is called, say, illuminated leadership in that, meaning that we need to shape our territorial cohesion bottom up. I don't believe in any, strict commandments for territorial cohesion that people would subscribe to because they are ready. They are not ready. At least they don't want to be steered top down by anyone. They prefer to see that their feeling, their perception and notion of happiness can be realized within the bigger framework of the nation or society. And in order to communicate on, in that sense, territorial cohesion, we probably need territorial leaders in our communities that understand the bigger picture of what the society, the people, the community in larger sense want. And then whether we could negotiate, I also do believe in this negotiate rhetorics, that in our small circle of people, we can negotiate if we fit to this broader framework, or if we want a bit more room in this bigger framework to proactively shape the norms and conventions, right? This is what you probably also picked up, Kai, on this territorial cohesion as a set of norms that we could see also certain deviations, certain revolts, certain rebellions on. So this could be quite a probable future, that we have certain broad understanding of the what territorial cohesion should be about. But then still, I think that we have some room for maneuver here, and this where our, say, personal freedom should be guaranteed in that, and that is where how we build the harmony. If we don't feel we live in harmony, of course, we feel anxiety, and that it leads to certain innovation, because then we need to innovate, we need to do something about my harmony, my coziness. And this, of course, causes the change. So this would be my kind of spontaneous reaction on this, matter of bottom-up, the grapes, bigger grapes, smaller grapes at different levels, because grapes create a grape wine. So they are part of a bigger future, of a bigger, say, entity, of a bigger wholeness.
No, but for me, that also links into the question of place-based development with those territorial leaders that kind of really also negotiate in different directions and that have the knowledge on the territories they are in charge to, which links then also over to the other parts that I outlined in the beginning, more the administrative, the policy part. So it's not only about individuals and people, but at one point we end up in some sort of institutional organization. And here I would start with you, Triton, as basically with those things that Victor just mentioned. We enter a discussion about power, kind of what kind of governance structures do we put up and what kind of power do we have, and what are then the borders between the different types of territories. And I know for you personally, a borderless Europe, a lot of cooperation across all the borders is very important. And maybe you can dwell a little bit on those aspects, how we could make that happen in terms of putting cohesion into practice.
I mean, that's quite difficult to say how, because we often speak out our frustration, and we, even in our discussion now, though we are discussing about 50 years from now, still, let's say the projections reflect our current mindset and, things that we are doing now. But definitely from my viewpoint, at least as I experience, from my experience so far, I'd really be dreaming for a culturally diverse but borderless Europe. I mean, it's, from my viewpoint, it's a little bit tricky because, like I was saying at the beginning, you are and you are not part of Europe. And discussing and listening to the discussion, you have a mixed perception. Sometimes it sounds like a very harmonious Europe, but if you dig inside, there are a lot of, these differences. But most importantly, again, I look from our own perspective, how you are kind of imposed, how you have to do certain things in order to be part of the club. And you see that whatever it's requested, though it sounds good, when it comes to being implemented, it derails to something that it really doesn't represent neither the groups or people that is supposed to affect, nor correct the problems which eventually remain very systemic. And that's what I was trying to say also before. We have a system where we delegate representation. And in the process of delegating representation, you have so many interrelations that in the end, the final outcome in terms of decision being made, not necessarily represent what the source would really want. And I agree with many other colleagues that talked before, in the sense that, this will require education, this will require, people are not very always fully aware. Someone wants one thing, the other wants another thing. And from my perspective, I would definitely be in favor of this bottom-up approach. But when we talk about, trade-offs and negotiations, we have to keep in mind what currency are we talking about? Because in these negotiations, in order to we trade off always something. But the problem is that the currency is very different for everybody. And how we can, I'm not saying, because it goes against what I'm trying to advocate, having a unified currency, because this again will kill the diversity, but how we could have a value system that somehow makes people, when they exchange, they don't, let's say, exchange against each other, but how this can be made very transparent, open. And I don't have an answer on this one, but I'd really like to see a process where democracy really works, because again, I'm sorry, maybe I speak still a little bit of my frustration, but I see that democracy could very easily derail into a facade, in a sense that you have all systems in place which presumably are democratic, but at the end, they really don't represent the people, the constituents. And I mean, there are different reasons why it's happening, but I'd really like, and I have not figured out any other better mechanism, but how we could really empower people. And that's a question, I mean, I don't have an answer on that, but I do believe that I also don't believe on this imposed top-down kind of solution. I am more of this bottom-up approach, but also there are many flaws, and I don't have an answer yet to say, you know, how we could replace the existing power structures with a more fluid, open and transparent, because eventually this is the system that we have. And 50 years from now, although futuristic I could be, I cannot really identify another system that can easily replace that, other than, of course, educating people through education. I hope that somehow at least will be more convergent on the currency, on this trade-offs and exchange, and this eventually will help us to have a more unified, let's say, approach on how we want to solve problems.
Thank you. But I think for me, this kind of fluid, open, transparent are actually building blocks of something that could be a more radical understanding of democracy and taking people to the power. So from that side, I find that very helpful, and also the idea of a bottom-up shared value system. And questions, of course, how to get there and shared by whom. So I think that gives us then a lot of aspects, and Alison referred earlier already to fragmentation aspects. So it's not easy. But I would like to win a little bit further into your geography and ask you, Andreu, because you emphasized really that when we talk about cohesion, we talk about cohesion in a very well-defined box. And there's a world outside that box. And if we really want to have cohesion, we need to look over the edge of our box and see how that works. So how do we include neighboring countries, and not only Western Balkans, but also Northern Africa and other parts? Can you give us a few more words on your ideas of how we can shape cohesion that is not just looking at ourselves?
Okay. Actually, for me, we will improve a lot and clarify this discussion a lot. Instead of talking of territorial cohesion, we talk about territorial cooperation. I think territorial cooperation between, you know, municipalities, councils, regions, countries, European institutions, this is something which is needed and is difficult, but is indispensable. I think in Europe we share most of the values. We share more of the politics and a lot of things we share. We share enough things to be focused more on the general goals, on the ODS, all these goals that we share. And we should be much concerned on territorial cooperation. I think it was a great Polish sociologist, all of you know Simon Böhme, that said that the problem now is not to think what we want, it's not to imagine, it's how to do things. So it's how to do things, how to change things. This is where we have real problems, not much on the ideas or the values. I'm reading, you know, the goals and aims of policy aims of European policies in the last 20 years. I think most of us here agree 99%, and the rest of Europeans maybe agree a lot on all these aims. The problem is how to do that. And for me, the challenge is territorial cooperation. So how we can cooperate. I'm working in the last 2 years, the weekends and Friday afternoon as deputy mayor in my hometown. Cooperation with other small towns around is so difficult because it requires to think in the future, it requires generosity, it requires trust, it requires knowing what you want, knowing the others. So cooperation is really difficult for governments which are focused on solving problems for tomorrow morning for a number of persons. So when you are thinking ahead in the long term, and you are thinking on the common good, not just for you, but for other people around, other municipalities, countries, regions around, is much difficult, requires a lot of investment. So for me, territorial cooperation between governments is a key issue, more than any other thing, more about talking what means territorial cooperation. And now I'm talking, I would like just to finish with something I really love when Kaisa in a way was saying, if I understand you right, Kaisa, you said if Groupius was here with us, he will say, sorry guys, I was wrong. My radical ideas of modernity were, naive in a way. And you said something I was, I like it very much to listen. You said that maybe it's time to give a step back, go backwards, think all over again. And this reminds me, Martin Heidegger, contemporary of Groupius, that he was strongly, Heidegger was kind of different from Groupius because he was, at the same time that very radical in philosophical terms, he was also, place-based, strong place-based and communitarian-based, so much that he was a Nazi for a period of time. So his radical ideas were also wrong as well. Maybe Heidegger will tell us, sorry guys, I was wrong. So maybe when we end up with Alison approach modeling, do we need radical ideas, or these radical ideas are too dangerous? So actually, I'm coming back to territorial cooperation. So let's improve things by cooperating. Let's clarify governments, let's clarify the regulations, let's organize ourselves, let's plan ahead. So let's make possible for governments to cooperate. I think territorial cooperation is the challenge, as Böhme said, let's do things that we agree on them. Sorry for this.
No, thanks. I quite liked your very straightforward saying, okay, cohesion is actually about cooperation. And for me, the link to what Kaisa said goes even further than your link, because Kaisa was saying, okay, it's about imagination and then the experimentations that kind of Ariane and Alison brought in, and then saying, and then to learn. And for me, that kind of learning is also on the learning of cooperation, how we can do that to get where we want to be, and that imaginary part. And maybe that cooperation dimension leads me also to Oksana, because you used very strongly the image of an orchestra in policymaking. And saying, okay, we actually need to cooperate between the different policy players and instruments to get those things happening. And also there a strong dialogue is needed. Can you give us a few more hints on how you would link that to maybe picking on Andreu's ideas about cohesion being about cooperation?
Well, it's true that it's really linked to the cooperation, and the dialogue are really linked. I'm thinking actually that we should, as I said before in my first email, that I think that learning from good practices would be a good idea. And I think maybe I'm wrong, but since I saw using the tools that already were experimented, I think it's a good idea. For instance, a policy, the smart specialization policy. I think for the territorial development, cohesion, cooperation, this is a good idea to go improving and go working in this direction. And the idea of competition, I really liked it, because from competition at the territorial level, at the company level, involving the government, involving the society, is, I think it's really interesting, because it not only generates wealth ideas, but we can, with this competition, and it not only involve dialogue and cooperation, we can finance the R&D with the competition at the end. So, but still, in order to regulate, I mean, the competition should be regulated. So with a strong regulatory framework, this is really important for the competition. So that's basically my idea, is that we should keep going using the tools that already were experimented. And I think keep transforming the challenges in opportunities as smart specialization is supposing. So that's.
No, thank you very much. That's so co-competition really is a mix of cooperation and competition to move forward and to frame the way we cooperate. I think that is a nice idea which adds into the discussion we have, and also what you said about the use of existing tools. For me, that echoes very much what has been said earlier, saying we don't need new radical ideas. We just need to be more radical about the ideas we have. And maybe we also need to be more radical about the tools we have and really make use of them and not just kind of do as we tend to.
It's true, but now we have new challenges, like the same working towards health. We have climate change, we have the sustainability issues, so we could be more radical in these areas. Why not?
Okay, thank you. And that leads me finally to Asha. And for me, there are kind of two things kind of from our pre-discussion and from what you said. You made a very strong point in our pre-discussion about cohesion and equal not meaning everything being the same. And I think that has been implicitly echoed here, and also the question of identity. But then in your inputs, you also put an extremely strong perspective on young people and saying it's actually the young people and their values that kind of will shape it and that will bring the shift as they look into different directions. Is there a way that we can get more reflections on how we can capture that and how we can keep the young people engaged and not say, okay, here's a formal procedure, please run that?
Exactly. You know, me as being a bureaucrat for 20 years now, that's kind of, let's say, putting me in different perspective after that. And yeah, you know, about making territorial cohesion, it's important to consider that we use wording like a place-based approach, and we like to say that we need to analyze data and then we will see what will be the solution for the place. And we forgot about the identity of it. And usually we create some kind of solution for that place when we analyze data. I'm a geographer, I do that a lot. And at the end, you know, we decide about what is good for that place, but maybe it's really not. Maybe it's good in the past, but it's not good in the future. And that's why I said that it's important, especially to listen to younger citizens, because they will live in that future and they should have this word about how their places will look like. And there was an interesting moment a few weeks ago. I was listening to the news and there was one article piece into the news about, you know, how rural areas are really disadvantaged because you cannot reach the doctor really fast in rural area. And then they asked a quite young person, how far is the doctor that you're not reaching? And he said, yeah, I have to go 5 kilometers. right? That's Slovenian perception, okay? Not every perception, fine. Of course, the person is really living in really rural area of Slovenia. I live in Ljubljana, and I lost my doctor for 2 times in 10 months. And I was advised to go to the doctor in the city that is like 50 kilometers away. So, because there is no more doctors in Ljubljana who would accept a person. So what is really the problem here is that from top down, we, in the sense of analyzing data and looking place-based approach, but still we don't take the identity at the end of the place and the real needs. And the other point is that I think that we confused what is a good life. That in Europe we are quite good, living really good. And at the end, we see that we are not that much satisfied, even though we have more or less everything. And we find, we look for something more all the time. We look for something more, we look for something better, being a new road, being a new building, being a new, but we don't look back. And maybe for us, it would be good, or for some places that they would be left like they are. And people there would live better, you know, because changing all places and making them equal, it's first of all, it's not possible. But second, it's not every village can be a city, and not every service can be accessed the same way, always the same way. So these are also the questions we need to define. And when we approach to the policies, I really believe that policymakers have good intentions. They don't have bad intentions, but when they set some narrow goals for the policies, even though we call it really open goals, but at the end, especially cohesion policy is quite narrowed in that sense. So it's really not offering the place to those specific places to respond and to use those sources from the cohesion policy in the way that they need to. So they are taught with quite specific fishes to prepare operational programs, for example. How did they have to prepare it? And that's not really responding to the bottom-up needs, because they are guided really strictly from that point. Yeah.
Thank you very much. For me, this round was very inspiring. In particular now, after you gave it one more twist, and everybody who knows me knows that when I'm in a meeting, I have constant drawings and trying to make things matching. And at the moment, it materializes around 3 clusters. The one is really what you just dwelled on about perception. There is no universal definition of what we want as a good life, or what, Victor, you referred to, the acceptable. So what is really, it is very individual how we perceive that, and we need to make sure that this is brought in, and that leads to all the kind of bottom-up discussions that we have, that we only get when we have more bottom-up processes. And that's, for me, the one cluster around which we have actually been discussing. The other one is then related a little bit also to how to empower that, to make sure that everybody can participate. I think for me in particular, Alison, you and Rita, you were very outspoken on that. I think you need to make sure that this is not becoming an elitist project where only certain people are there, but we need to find a way that we empower people so that we can build those shared values or negotiate around those shared values without negotiating against each other, as Rita and that. And in a way, maybe that comes together in something that you, Ariane, said, which is about this kind of citizen science, experimentation, working along those lines. And by that, linking it to kind of, we need to be able to imagine what we want for ourselves and for the wider territory. We need to be ready to experiment. And that's, for me personally, one of the most difficult parts, because we live in a world where when we start something, we almost need to guarantee what the outcome will be. So I cannot experiment that freely, because as soon as I start a project, the funding body wants to know what deliverables are you on. So we need to find a way to allow for the experimentation and to learn from that, and to learn from that on cooperation, on competition, and all those things. So for me, I have the feeling we have just the start of a discussion. We could take a few more hours. Before I now ask you to give me more reflections, I actually would play over the ball to Thomas and see kind of, from your perspective, to what degree are we getting kind of out and about and talk nonsense? You say, well, that's all very fine, but from where I sit, it doesn't echo, or where you say, well, there are actually some things that make sense and that's worthwhile to think further and explore further.
Thank you, Kai. I hope you can hear me better. I don't know. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So I never expected that I have to defend Walter Groupius here, but I will try. But I also will try to make a reference to Fritz Hesse. Fritz Hesse was the mayor of Dessau, and when he heard that the Bauhaus had to leave Weimar, he was one of the ones who got really engaged to get the Bauhaus there. And he even offered to pay for the building, for most of the buildings, by the way. And he did that because Dessau was an industrial city. It was up on the way up. And he also had a clear idea to link it with the city, with the development of the city. So maybe the perspective of Fritz Hesse from our angle, from we look from regional development, is quite useful. Why did he do it? And then the second is also Walter Groupius. One of his famous words, or one of the famous words of the Bauhaus school, is that design follows the function. I would say design follows the purpose. And when I prepared for this, I had this in mind, and when I listened to you, I decided I try to combine the two, because this is the only time I can speak, so I'll try. So when we look at the purpose, of course, we need to know what do we want. And if we look at cohesion, we look at the individual, the person, and we look at the territory. And when we look at the person, we have to understand what is the person, what is their interest, what is their willingness. We had a lot of references to young people. Do the young people want the same as we did? Do they have the same norms, values, interests? Is their happiness the same as our happiness, or the happiness of our parents? So this question also about who are we, who are they, for whom we do it, I think is a very important part. And I think Groupius would start with that. He would try to understand, for whom do I do it? And I give one example. We have in the literature the somewheres and the nowheres. The somewheres are, they don't bother where they are. They are with the internet, they will go with their laptop anywhere in the world. They feel at home in the world, their region is the world. And we have the nowheres who can't move anywhere, who are afraid, who are want to stay where they are, and they want that the job comes to them and not the other way around. So we have different people we are dealing with. And I think that we have to look into when we look into the future, how does it change and how does it go? And also, and then of course, the second point we have is the places. And I think there was words like fairness. What is fairness in the future? Asha, you said that equality will not happen, but what is fair in the system in the future for us between urban and rural, between north-south, water-rich and water-poor countries, countries with heavy pollution and those who don't. And then, of course, linked to this is the question, what is a region?
we have the debate about functional regions. We have the regions of institutional regions. We have the question of borders. We have the question of, do we have to develop a concept of regions like a Lego piece? And you have different color Lego pieces, and for each need on health, on environment, you have different Lego pieces, and everybody builds their own region with adding different Lego pieces together. So the question is also, what is the region in the future? And we have, of course, the question after COVID, what is the new normal? We always thought that agglomeration economics is the world. Innovation goes because when people come together, and that's where we're going. Now we see you can work from home, you can work, the Commission just has decided to, or they are in the process of deciding, only to have 70% of their office space for 100% of their staff, because they're expecting that people work from home. That really is fundamental shift in the way they live the work. What does it mean for the city? So the question of what is a region is important. And Victor, you've done a fantastic work in this direction, also with the reference framework and others, where you define different regions. And when you then come to the question, design follows the purpose, then we look at what is the design of the policy we're talking about. And then, of course, we have the question, how do we measure success? Is success that everybody gets richer? Mass production, there was this reference, and I think Groupius would not be the advocate for mass production, but he would be the advocate for sustainable engagement, a circular economy for all, not for the few. I think I would have to say that he's a person. Bauhaus stands for the mass production in a given situation. For example, the products the Bauhaus did were handmade. They were not mass produced. Okay, the mass production came afterwards. So this handmade local crafts engagement was a very important part of the Bauhaus logic at that time. They worked together and they had great parties together. So the question is, what does it mean for the policy? So GDP, we have the question of well-being. We have also the question of what is cohesion as a value. And that's where I have to do a bit of advertising block for the committee. We have started with Kai to have a deeper reflection. What is cohesion as a value for the people, togetherness? What is cohesion as a spirit, not only for one policy, but for the whole? And how do we really make it participatory, inclusive, engaging, future-oriented, experimenting, and so forth? And what does that mean for the policies? And not just for cohesion, but also for the other policies, in order to really address this. And I think a lot of your points, which are coming, were very, very useful, very helpful, and I hope I can reflect on them. But I also have the question, what kind of democracy we will have in the future? Because, of course, this takes part in a system of participation and democracy. And that comes back to also the role of the state in the future. Some of you said we need leadership, we need local leadership. And Fritz Hesse was a local leader getting the Bauhaus to him, and it was a very, very good idea. But the role of the state is also defined on, Aisha, you mentioned the market. What definition of state do we have? And I'm a bit advocate that we need an entrepreneurial state. We can only reach the objectives of our missions if we are bold in this. Not just an entrepreneurial state which only comes in when markets fail, but when markets been set and the direction is given, together with an entrepreneurial discovery process. Some of you mentioned smart specialization, the essence of this as part as well. And the question which linked to it is common purpose. What is the purpose of all of this? And I think there we come back to the young people. We come back to the old people, because we have fewer younger, but more older people. And I think there, the focus on the purpose is very important. How can we ensure that people are happy, and Victor, you called it the harmony in society, harmony between people, harmony between territories, and there this idea, understanding cohesion as a value, as not just a contradiction to competition. We have learned that cohesion is an essential part of peaceful coexistence and cooperation, co-creation, co-competition, as you mentioned it. And this, of course, is the deeper reflection. And I would say the Bauhaus reflected that in the past. It did it against big opposition. It was never liked by the populists. It was never liked by the authoritarians. And this liberation, experimentation, engagement, nature focus, circular focus, local focus, empowerment, I think are the messages of the Bauhaus. That's why I think the new Bauhaus has to encapsulate that, otherwise it fails. It can only be with this local action, cooperation, as it was mentioned before. And so this really links up, and the last word I have is we need new local leaders. And they need to be young, they need to be women. We have too few women in this game. And then the second, we have to really empower them through also proper decentralization. Because what we have is we have many objectives being put forward on the local level, but the local level is not given the right instruments to do so. Also because we want to control everything, Brussels, national level, and we do not allow failure. And somebody said here, Kaisha, you said, let's fail together. I think let's fail together means also let's try it together. And I think, and let's find a way, and the policies need to support this with the aim of allowing failure in order to modify in the future. So these were some reflections. I hope I took on board some of your points, but I felt that was my reaction to what I've heard. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think it was a pretty good summary and picked a lot of those points that we have heard today. Before handing now over to another 4 hours of discussion, Christian, you had a question as well.
Yes, maybe I have one own remark, and then I have another question to all of you for, let's say, like a final round. Thomas, first of all, thanks again for your remarks and for mentioning this project on cohesion as a value. When I look back now at the discussions, I'm wondering whether cohesion is actually a value or whether it is more than just a value or a norm. I thought maybe cohesion is also something like a process. Actually, there is a strong process dimension to it for me. We heard very often the term of negotiations actually between different groups of society, and maybe cohesion is also about this. It's maybe like a constant state of renegotiating what we want to, where we want to live and how we want to live. The term of democracy, how radical democracy is, how radical do we reinterpret democracy? I think that was also an important question for me, because in the end, democracy has to, it's our form of living together. We are together in this, but we need to involve as many people as intensively as possible, and we need to make people's life better. I think these are the two demands, the input side and the output side. But there is not one solution. There is not one size fits all. The perspectives on this are very different. So I think it's balancing all these questions that were raised by Thomas, but also before. So I now have many more questions in my head than I have answers. But I guess that was to be expected. And I think it's a very nice outcome. But before we really close the brackets and conclude, I would ask one question maybe to you. If you now take these discussions and look back where we started and now where we were heading, and you would have to summarize all of this like in one tweet, in one question towards very short, to the point, what would be your main takeaway message from today's discussion? I think that would be nice as a summary and also as a last chance for each of you to briefly say a few words, but I would ask you to really stay short so that we can finalize in time. So it would be perfect if it fits in 140 characters in a tweet. And as this question was nothing we told you about before, I would ask the first person who has a nice message to raise his or her hand, and then we will continue with the others. So who feels like prepared for summarizing this, like in one key question or one key point, one key message? Any voluntary panelist? I think, Andreu, you blinked first, then you are first. I think you are always very spontaneous and creative. So what would be a short takeaway message?
Short.
Yeah, sorry.
Short. Okay, I have to read again Groupius to see all the interesting and positive visions he had. But maybe I can re-emphasize what I said before. For sure, Groupius had very useful ideas we can apply today, but as well as Heidegger, that were opposite, as well Heidegger, even though Heidegger was for a period of time of a Nazi. So I think in Europe we have plenty of good ideas all around, plenty of good ideas. And probably we should focus on those ideas on territorial cohesion, which are more operational, those that will help us to do things that we want to do. And probably for me, territorial cooperation is the critical idea, is the critical challenge, the critical challenge in Europe today to be more efficient in the way we are able to apply in reality what most of us agree.
Okay, thanks. Then Kyle just sent me a message that Asha also raised her hand. So Asha, I would ask you next. One key message in 140 characters.
Yeah, I would say that for the future, radical doesn't mean we have to invent something new, but we can use something old.
Thanks a lot. Then I see Kaiser's hand. Oh, that runs automatically. That's very nice. Please, Kaiser.
Maybe something isn't like now this kind of let's fail together leads me to something like, isn't this kind of a humble approach? Let's be humble about the future, about like so many great ideas have also failed. We need to maybe make sense of together which are worth exploring further, and then really go kind of sort things out in kind of what are kind of clear forward themes, where can we act, and what are the others when you need to really ponder within that, like in a humble community that is open to new things.
Thank you. And I would ask Dritan to give us a short message.
Very short. I think though we might, I mean, not differ, but provide different perspectives on the new radical ideas. I think we all have a little bit of more difficulty of new radical processes. And I think the takeaway is that we really need to be looking forward at what those new radical processes could be in order to achieve those new radical ideas.
Who wants to go next?
I'm happy to go next.
Yeah, Alison, please.
Thanks. When you were talking about cohesion and what is it? Is it a process or whatever? And I think we've talked a lot in this conversation about processes, but actually I think we do have to come back to cohesion as an outcome. We have to know what it looks like, and that's what we're working towards. So my statement would be cohesion is an outcome, but with a highly differentiated process to getting there.
Thanks a lot. Who's going next? Elisa, please. And then Ariana.
My sum up is very subjective. And first off, let me start by telling Andrei, Heidegger was not just briefly Nazi, you know, he was Nazi. So let's just face it. And maybe what I felt today was a lack of conflict. We're all very much in tune, you know, we're all very much, yeah, we all share the same values, we're all talking the same language, we're all saying the same words. You know, that's something that the pandemic actually got an effect of me. It was a linguistic depletion. And this is somehow how I feel. You know, we need to feel, how should I say, uncomfortable with ourselves. And I don't think I felt that uncomfortable today. You know, I didn't feel that much otherness, to tell you frankly. So maybe, yes, maybe we need to, you know, discuss with people who have tremendously different ideas from us and tremendously different values from us. And also, just, I know I had to be short, but again, yet another thing, and this goes back to subjective. Again, all the angst that we feel feels very this Schopenhauer boredom, you know. We've just, you know, we have food, we have houses, we have, you know, we have everything, you know, that's not the world. And we're just bored, you know. We need a sense of purpose, we need a sense of meaning, and these things can be very, very dangerous, as you know. So yeah, let's get uncomfortable, please.
Thank you. Ariane was next.
Thank you. I actually felt uncomfortable at the thought of a machine that makes you uncomfortable. Aren't we all horribly numb with our mobile phones that are so comfortable and telling us what to do all the time? No, but so just one sentence would be, for me, that emerged from this discussion, which I very much enjoyed, would be a radical new form of democracy is needed that brings us towards more cohesion and place-based differentiation. So it's quite close to what Alison said, and that embraces complexity and uncertainty. So that would be one sentence. But my thought behind that is, what is the biggest threat, I think? And listening to all of this, there were two. One is governing by numbers, because it doesn't leave room for discussion on different values. And the second biggest threat to me is this primacy on technological solutions and the machine. And so I think those are the recipes that point us to where we need radical change in the way, in our way for social coordination. I think they are sick. I'm sorry, I'm always very emphatic, but so no, for me, I was stimulated by this. I didn't feel comfortably numb. I had enough disagreement and dissonance to hopefully be creative a little bit.
That's good to hear. Thanks, Ariane. And then Oksana, do you want to say a few last words?
Okay, I don't know what to say. It's really difficult, but since we are talking about circular economy, about recycling ideas, so maybe let's recycle instrument and make policy more circular and upscale the ideas.
So again, good practices about policy design and sharing them with each other. Yeah, thanks a lot. And then last but not least, Victor, if you want, you have also the chance for the last statement.
Yes, very short, because we have, I think, 1.5 minutes to go. I would say so that future for all people and places, but please let us know what kind of future you really want. That's it. So have a dialogue, have the people on the ground that speak to you as a policymaker, because you should know better what is your future that you would dream of, what is your acceptance, what is your happiness, what is your quality. So it must be yours and not ours as the policymakers.
Yep, thank you. And then Kai, I guess you continue directly.
Thank you. Well, it has been extremely interesting, and I partly agree with Elisa that we didn't have the time to really sort out where the differences between all the statements, but I have the feeling there are quite a number underlying. differences. When Roberto, who soon gives the closing words, or his colleagues invited us to do that Christian meeting, what shall we achieve? And they said, well, just go for it and test. And we were kind of stumbling over that, not having a target to achieve, and to engage with an open dialogue where we have no idea what we should aim at, what to expect. And so we really entered that and said, okay, let's have a discussion among friends around the topics that we usually don't explicitly discuss, and around friends that don't discuss together, that might in different connections talk, but not in that way. And I found it quite stimulating. So I think there was a lot of ideas that are under the surface about also the importance of people, the importance of certain governance structures, which are radically different actually from when we discuss cohesion in any kind of assignment to DG Regio, European Parliament, ESPON. I think we actually have quite a number of things. What I propose is that Christian and me do whatever kind of attempt to write up a short note on our discussion, and we will circulate that among you, and maybe we can also find a format to jointly discuss further with those interested to dig out the kind of uncomfortable parts where we actually disagree, and we're now just the short time didn't allow to dwell on that. But thank you very much to all of you for engaging with us and being with us in that kind of very open process. And I hope you enjoyed it. And now for the last seconds, I would like to give the word to Roberto, as he actually is the brain and initiator behind.
Thank you very much. Congratulations on your fantastic contributions. The conversation has been really stimulating for me. And if you have 2 minutes, I want to share with you some ideas that I have written during the conversation. If our path is influenced negatively by where we are born or where we live, this is a signal of inequality. Often the most radical innovation lies in going back to the essence of things. It could be the path to harmony. We need to combine competencies and theoretical incompetencies to an expertise, to move out of disciplines and experts to work in a different way, to see the world in a radical different way. We have to apply the hummingbird strategy. Hybridization is about negotiation, it's about brokerages between different sectors, governance levels, and people. Perhaps we need to put in crisis the smart specialization strategies of the territories and think about the intelligent combination of different visions and capacities with purpose. We work in Conexiones improbables in a creative economy, and always we say that there are no creative and sustainable territories without creative people with a cultural sustainability. For that, it's very important to empower people, to empower communities, to trust them, to use the power of diversity, the power of collective intelligence. For everybody to be part of it, we need equity. Building collective projects on the basis of the lowest common denominator between individuals. People are ready for a regenerative circular culture, but perhaps it's not in the same way public administrations. There is a key question about participation. Public administrations usually understand participation in how people take part in administrative issues. But the real participation is in relation to how administrations take part in social issues, in citizenship issues. Can we go beyond the division between top-down versus bottom-up processes? Can we try to talk on the same level, recognizing each other's legitimacy? What do we need? Time, spaces, and methodologies to build together through experimentation, social innovation, try to do it yourself, to do it together, to do it with others. Invest in administrative capacity of local communities and boost territorial cooperation. We need to move from cooperative competition between territories to competent cooperation between territories to get more value for all, not only more production or more GDP. And this is more like a jazz band than a symphony orchestra for me, where leadership is unique. We need distributed leadership with the capacity to boost the capacities of people in the territories. Quality of analysis and quality of collaborative data is a key to build local ecosystems that integrates culture, creativity, and all other sectors. This allows effective cross-fertilization systems to go beyond silos and promote active citizenship and democracy. And is that we are trying to do with Cultursistema. It's a new tool that I'll send you about it. That is a new taxonomy about cultural and creative ecosystems that I think that could be a good tool for the future in Europe. Okay, thank you very much. I'm very happy with the conversation. Congratulations, Kai, Christian. Thanks for your commitment with this initiative. See you soon.
Thank you very much.
Yes, I'm sorry. Kai, could I say a few words, please?
Go ahead.
Yes, a minute. So before ending the conversation, I would like to thank you all of participants once again. And I just wanted to say that it has been a really pleasure to listen to the conversation. Thank you for sharing all your knowledge and different perspectives on such an important topic as territorial cohesion, social cohesion, and cooperation. It has been really great. And I just want to remember that tomorrow we are holding the 5th parallel dialogue, and we will talk about sustainable and inclusive city. I'm going to share my screen so there you can see. Let me know. Yeah. So there you can see the calendar. So as you can see, we are holding a conversation all day, every day, all day of the week until the 15th of June. And for sure, you are all invited to attend. So you can find all the streamings in our website and on our social media. And just to let you know that we are using the hashtags Groupius 2021 on the new European Bauhaus. So if you want to tag something about this conversation or other conversations, you can do it. And by the way, remember also that we are having a final conversation on the 22nd of June. Even the active participants of this group will be Christian and Kai. For sure, you are all invited to attend the conversation. So I hope you can see you then. And once again, thank you, especially to you, Kai and Christian, who from the beginning, you have shown great willingness and earnestness to collaborate with us in this initiative. So. And actually you brought with you a spectacular panel of professionals. So thank you very much.
And thank you for organizing, and thanks to the panel. They made it. Kind of Christian and me were just inviting people.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks a lot, and have a nice afternoon and evening.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.